Well, anyway, he also said that, hey, the only way you can balance something is to measure it. You know, if you want to balance something, you have to put it on a scale and you have to balance it. And so I was never taught to measure hormones. Now, how can you go through a 4-year residency in OBGYN and we never drew blood or anything to measure hormones? But when you're a resident, it's another blueprint and another hypnosis. When you're a resident, you're not taught to ask questions. You're taught to see one, do one, teach one. Okay, so you don't ask any questions. You see what's done, you do it, and then you teach the other person to do it, which is a crazy way to do something, to not question yourself. You always should question yourself. And I talk about being in a caterpillar line, and I have a video about that, about when that see one, do one, teach one. That doesn't give you the opportunity to change. So that's why medicine doesn't change, because it goes by that see one, do one, teach one. So anyway, why don't you measure hormones? Why are you just giving birth control pills? Why are you just giving, this? And so he talked about saliva testing. And in upcoming episodes, I'm going to talk a lot about saliva testing because that's how you balance. Okay. You have to measure it, then you can balance it. And then once you can balance it, then you become in harmony. And then that gives you a peaceful mind and body. And that's what this whole thing is about. And this is what we're going to talk about, this ageless blueprint. The blueprint is you have to try and achieve balance. You have to get in harmony, and that gives you peace. And if you see on my banner that comes up, that guy on the right, that's somebody I met in Petra. And I'll tell you how I got to Petra. That's another story. But this guy he lives in the caves in Petra in Jordan, and his family's lived there for 500 years, and they are totally content because they are in balance and harmony with nature, and that guy is in perfect peace. We talked to him for 2 hours, and I tell you, he's the most interesting man in the world, and he lives in caves, and his family has lived there. So he doesn't have Instagram, he doesn't have CNN or Fox News, he doesn't have YouTube, he doesn't have any of that, but he's probably I envy him how he can live with what we call nothing and have everything. And that's, the paradoxical things about life. We keep trying to get more and more and more, thinking that that's going to provide us what we need. And what we really need is peace and harmony. And every cell in your body has to be in harmony for you to have a long lasting, fulfilling life. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So anyway, so we balanced our hormone, we measured our hormones and we balanced them. And all of a sudden my wife was normal again. So I did that again with some of my employees in my practice, and it worked for them too. And so I took this book called The Magic of Progesterone by John Lee. I want to give everybody who has helped me along the way credit. And I read that book and I got the references from that book. This was before Google Scholar. This was 25. We wrote the book, Are Your Hormones Making You Sick? 25 years ago. It was published in 2000 for the first time. So I got all the references, I read them all, and then I went back to the physiology book just to look at how does the body actually work. Because in medical school, you're primarily taught pharmacology. You're taught how drugs work. And you're told to forget the first 2 years of medical school where you looked at physiology and biochemistry and physics and all of these other different sciences, and then you're only taught about drugs. So I went back to the physiology book, and the physiology book clearly explained how estrogen makes things grow, progesterone makes things stop growing and develop fully. And that's why when this is out of balance, because estrogen is making things grow and you don't have enough progesterone to control that growth and make it develop normally, uncontrolled, undeveloped growth is the definition of cancer. So that's why when hormones are out of balance like that, you can get growth of fibroids, you can get growth of fibrocystic breast in women, you can get growth of breast cancers. So you always want to make sure that there is a balance. And I was taught that all women were low in estrogen. and we gave everybody estrogen. I was taught to give everybody estrogen when they were menopausal, and then the Women's Health Initiative came out and said, "No, no, 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 that's not the way to do it." And the reason why we made the mistake because we tried to balance something without measuring it. So anyway, so saliva testing, and I'm gonna have a YouTube video. Did you know that spitting can change your life? Because spitting or saliva changed my life. It took me in a whole different direction. And what it did was it taught me that I didn't learn everything I needed to know in medical school. So if I didn't learn what I should have learned about the residency that I studied in for 4 years, then what else didn't I learn? That made me, so let me go back. So then we wrote the book called Are Your Hormones Making You Sick? And we were measuring and balancing estrogen and progesterone. And with that book, I began to speak. And I have my first lecture that I did out of the country to make me an international speaker. I have it on my school group that you see down, that's scrolling down there. And I started speaking and I became popular speaking. So I went around to these conferences and was talking about balancing estrogen and progesterone. And then while I was at those conferences, I was hearing speakers talking about stress and how important stress was. And I found a study that said 75 to 90% of all visits to primary care physicians are for stress related complaints or disorders. And I'm like, wow, if 75 to 90% of my patients have stress related complaints or disorders, if I focus on stress, I'm going to be right 75 to 90% of the time. And I'm going to tell you that was 25 years ago. I'm going to tell you now that stress is probably the culprit for 99% of all visits to primary care physicians. So I wanted to become a stress expert. And also, I talk about measuring. So, how do you measure stress? Well, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So people say you need to manage your stress better, manage your stress better. Well, I can't manage it if I can't measure it. I found out you can measure stress one way in saliva. You can look at cortisol levels. Now, cortisol should be high in the morning and should be low at night. Cortisol mobilizes glucose so you have a steady flow of energy during the day. Now, what happens is that when you are overly stressed, you need more glucose so that you can have more energy. And so your body doesn't know whether you're stressed out about a test or whether you're stressed out because a tiger is chasing you. It just sees stress as stress. So it pours out adrenaline and cortisol. And so now you have all this extra glucose. What are you going to do with it? Well, what happens is that extra glucose, if you're not using it to run a fight, it can cause you to store fat. Now, let's go back to this cortisol curve that you can see in saliva, and I'm going to show you some examples in some YouTube videos and some other podcasts. So first, it goes up high so that you can get away from the tiger. You can, get away. So you have a lot of glucose rolling. You can only do that for so long because your stress response is supposed to be for an acute danger. But we're not stressed for 10 or 15 minutes. We're stressed for 10 or 15 years. And your adrenal gland can't keep that up. It can't keep that up that high. So what happens is instead of it having a high low like this, it just goes like this, midway, stays midway the whole time. What happens there is that in the morning, you don't have the energy you need because it should be up here and it's down here. At night, it should be way down here and it's up here. So you're tired all day, but you can't go to sleep at night. And if you can't sleep, you're not going to get better. I don't care what I do or anybody does. If you can't sleep, you're not going to get better. So if you don't change that pattern, you're going to get worse and worse and worse. We call that adrenal fatigue. So we wrote a book called The Stress Connection, and it's explaining what I just explained. Now, there's other ways you can measure stress, and we're going to talk about that. You can measure it through heart rate variability. You can measure it through heart math, synchronizing your heart and your brain. Uh, Here's my biggest problem. I have so much I want to say. I have so much I want to teach. I just got to slow down and try and make sure that I do it in a logical fashion. So anyway, we wrote the book called The Stress Connection, and I went around speaking about both of those. All right. And we had seminars, we had all these things. And one day I was supposed to speak in Las Vegas. I was in my office all day. I caught a flight out there, and the next morning, I always was a 7:30, 8 o'clock speaker. And I got up, slides went up, and it was like somebody had changed the slides on me. I couldn't think, I couldn't go, and I had done that lecture 1,000 times. And what happened was I had adrenal fatigue. Some of the people who saw me speak thought they knew something was wrong with me. I really had to stop midway and just say, I don't know what's wrong, but I can't carry on. So I've lived through, I've lived through with my wife with hormones, with me burnout, and I did my cortisol curve, and it was flatline. And I'm gonna tell you, it took me 6 months to recover. And some of the patients I saw back then, I'm gonna tell you, they would talk to me and I could not comprehend what they were saying. And I don't think I heard anybody or whatever, but that's how I felt. So anyway, I took some time off and we decided that we were going to start something where I could uh, do this here. So we started something called the American Functional Medicine Association. My wife really spearheaded that for me. And uh, and we started having conferences here, and we would invite guests and so on, and it took us a year to have this once a year seminar. And in 2016 my sister passed away from cancer, and she had been fighting this for, it was the youngest sister right next to me. She had been fighting this for 5 or 6 years, and I kind of saw how conventional medicine it caused her to deteriorate, and I think it was prematurely. And so I really got interested in how I could give cancer patients a different outcome. And so that got me interested in that. So anyway, where